Alexander Morgan stood frozen among the gravestones, watching as a small girl placed wildflowers on his mother's grave. Tears streamed down her cherubic face as she whispered words he couldn't hear. When he finally approached, the child looked up with striking amber eyes. "You look just like her," the little girl said softly. "Just like who?" Alexander asked. The girl pointed to his mother's headstone. "Your sister, the one in the picture with Grandma Eleanor." Alexander's heart stopped. His sister Lily had vanished without a trace 15 years ago. How could this child possibly know about her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rain pattered against the windows of Alexander Morgan's penthouse office as he stared at the quarterly reports without truly seeing them. Outside, Chicago's skyline disappeared into sheets of gray, matching his mood on this somber anniversary. 20 years since his mother's passing, 5 years since he'd become CEO of Morgan Investments, 15 years since his sister vanished from their lives. "Mr. Morgan, your 3 o'clock cancelled," his assistant Grace announced through the intercom. "And Ms. Richards called again about the charity gala next weekend." "Thank you, Grace," he replied mechanically. "I'll be leaving early today." He closed his laptop with a decisive click. Veronica Richards would have to wait. His stepfather's new wife was determined to parade him at every social function as Chicago's most eligible bachelor, but today belonged to his mother's memory. Alexander loosened his tie as he rode the private elevator down to the parking garage. At 35, he had achieved everything his ambitious stepfather had demanded. Harvard Business School, meteoric rise through the company ranks, and finally, the corner office with its view of Lake Michigan. What James Morgan, no blood relation but legal father since Alexander was 10, hadn't counted on was the emptiness that accompanied the success. The sleek black Aston Martin roared to life beneath him, its engine purring as he navigated through downtown traffic toward the outskirts of the city. He made this pilgrimage once a year, always alone, a private ritual to honor the woman who had loved him unconditionally before cancer stole her away. Oak Ridge Cemetery spread before him, a peaceful expanse of rolling green dotted with marble and granite markers. The rain had tapered to a gentle mist that clung to his overcoat as he followed the familiar path to Eleanor Morgan's final resting place. His mother's grave was nestled beneath a weeping willow, its branches swaying gently in the spring breeze. But today, something was different. A small figure knelt before his mother's headstone, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. A child, a little girl no more than 7 or 8, was placing a bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the marble. Alexander stopped short, puzzled by the intrusion into his private grief. Who was this child, and why was she crying at his mother's grave? He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hello there," he said softly. The girl jumped slightly, turning teary eyes toward him. She wore a simple blue dress with a cardigan, her dark hair falling in waves around a heart-shaped face. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard. Amber with flecks of gold, unusual and somehow familiar. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I didn't think anyone else would come today." Alexander knelt to her level, curiosity overriding his initial irritation. "It's okay. This is my mother's grave. I come every year on this day. Did you know her?" The girl shook her head. "Not really. But Mommy tells me stories about Grandma Eleanor." Alexander felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Grandma Eleanor. His mother had only 2 children, himself and Lily had disappeared at 19. Her college dorm room left in disarray, her phone and wallet found. In a nearby park, The police had initially suspected kidnapping, then runaway status as weeks stretched into months with no ransom demand. The case had gone cold years ago, though Alexander had never stopped paying the private investigators. "What's your name?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Emma," she replied, studying his face with those unsettling amber eyes. "Emma Hayes." Hayes. The name meant nothing to him. "And how old are you, Emma?" "I'm 7 3/4, she announced, with the precision only children find important. Then she tilted her head, studying him with unexpected intensity. "You look just like her." "Just like who?" Alexander asked, though a sinking feeling in his stomach told him he already knew. The girl pointed to his mother's headstone. "Your sister, the one in the picture with Grandma Eleanor." Alexander's heart stuttered in his chest. The family photo albums had dozens of pictures of Lily and their mother together, but none had been made public after her disappearance. James had been adamant about privacy, refusing to let the press turn their family tragedy into tabloid fodder. "My sister?" he whispered, barely able to form the words. Emma nodded solemnly. "Mommy keeps the picture on our fireplace. She says it's so I know where I got my eyes from." Alexander felt dizzy, bracing his hand against the cool marble of his mother's headstone to steady himself. This child had Lily's eyes, the same unusual amber shade that had skipped him entirely, going from his mother to his sister, and now, apparently, to this little girl who called his mother Grandma Eleanor. "Emma!" A woman's voice called from down the path. "Emma, where are you?" The girl turned at the sound. "Over here, Mommy." Alexander rose to his feet, still unsteady, as a woman hurried into view. She stopped abruptly when she saw him, the color draining from her face. She wasn't Lily. This woman was petite with chestnut hair, where his sister had been tall and blonde, but the recognition in her eyes was unmistakable. She knew exactly who he was. "Emma, come here, please," she said, her voice tight with what sounded like fear. The child obediently went to her mother's side, looking between the two adults with confusion. "Mommy, this is the man who looks like Aunt Lily in the picture." The woman placed protective hands on her daughter's shoulders. "I know, sweetheart." She lifted her gaze to meet Alexander's, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and resignation. "Hello, Alexander, I'm Claire Hayes. I was Lily's roommate in college." Alexander stared at her, memories flooding back. There had been a roommate interviewed after Lily's disappearance, a quiet girl who'd been away visiting family that weekend. The police had cleared her quickly. "Where is my sister?" he demanded, his voice low and intense. Claire's eyes darted to her daughter, then back to him. "Not here, not now." She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a business card, handing it to him with fingers that trembled slightly. "This is my number. Call me tomorrow and I'll explain everything. But please, not in front of Emma." Alexander glanced at the card. Claire Hayes, child psychologist, then back at the woman who seemed to hold the key to the mystery that had haunted him for 15 years. 1,000 questions burned on his tongue, but the child's presence stayed them. "Tomorrow, then," he agreed tersely. "First thing." Claire nodded, relief washing over her features. "We should go now, Emma. Say goodbye." The little girl looked up at Alexander with innocent curiosity. "Are you coming to our house? Mommy makes the best chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays." "Not today, sweetheart," Claire answered before Alexander could respond. "But maybe another time." She tugged gently on her daughter's hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Come on now." Alexander watched them walk away, the child turning once to wave at him. He raised his hand automatically in response, his mind reeling. All these years of searching, of private investigators and dead ends, only to find a connection to Lily in this most sacred of places, from the lips of a child with her eyes. He turned back to his mother's grave, placing his own bouquet beside Emma's wildflowers. "I'm going to find her, Mom," he whispered. "I promise." Back in his penthouse that evening, Alexander paced restlessly, the business card clutched in his, a hand like a talisman. He'd nearly called the number a dozen times since returning from the cemetery, but something held him back. Claire's fear had been palpable. What was she afraid of, and why had she been bringing Emma to his mother's grave? The liquor cabinet beckoned, but he resisted. He needed clarity tonight. Instead, he went to the safe, hidden behind an abstract, painting in his study, dialing the combination with practiced ease. Inside, along with various documents and heirlooms, sat a worn leather photo album. He withdrew it carefully and carried it to his desk. The album contained the last photos of Lily, smiling at her high school graduation, posing awkwardly at Christmas dinner, laughing at the lake house with her hair whipping in the summer breeze. His fingers traced her face in the final photo, taken just weeks before she disappeared. She'd been 19, brilliant and beautiful, with a scholarship to Northwestern and dreams of becoming a doctor. He flipped back further to the family photos from before their mother's illness. There it was, a picture of Eleanor with her arm around 14-year-old Lily, both with the same amber eyes that had stared up at him today from Emma's face. Alexander's chest tightened as the implications sank in. If Emma was 7, nearly 8, and had those distinctive eyes. His phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. The caller ID showed his stepfather's name. "James," he answered, his voice carefully neutral. "Alexander, I was told you left the office early today." The disapproval in James Morgan's tone was expected. Though technically retired, the older man still kept tabs on company operations through various loyal employees. "It's the anniversary of Mom's death," Alexander replied, not bothering to hide his irritation. "I visited her grave." A heavy silence followed. "Yes, well, that's commendable, of course, but the Jensen merger documents needed your signature today. They'll have it first thing tomorrow. See that they do. The board is watching this deal closely." James paused. "Veronica mentioned you haven't RSVP'd to the charity gala." Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose. "I haven't decided yet. Your presence would be beneficial. The Reynolds family will be there, including their daughter Catherine. She's recently divorced, you know." The not-so-subtle matchmaking attempt grated on Alexander's already frayed nerves. "I'm aware. I'll let Veronica know my decision soon." "See that you do. The company's image is always my priority." Alexander finished the familiar refrain. "Good night, James." He ended the call before his stepfather could say more, tossing the phone onto the sofa with more force than necessary. James had always been this way. Cold, calculating, viewing every relationship as a potential business advantage, including, apparently, Alexander's love life. After his mother died, James had thrown himself into building the company, leaving Alexander and Lily in the care of a succession of nannies. Lily had rebelled against their stepfather's rigid expectations, while Alexander had tried to keep the peace by becoming the son James wanted. But he'd never stopped being his sister's ally in private, covering for her when she broke curfew, listening to her dreams of escaping James's influence. Had she actually done it? Run away deliberately, cutting all ties to the life she'd found? So stifling. But then why wouldn't she have contacted him? They'd been close despite the 5-year age gap between them. And what role did Claire Hayes play in all this? Alexander returned to the photo album, studying Lily's face as if it might reveal answers. Instead, his gaze was drawn to something in the background of one of the campus photos, a petite brunette, half turned away from the camera. Could that be Claire? He couldn't be certain, but the timing would be right. Sleep eluded him that night, as his mind churned with possibilities. By morning, he'd made a decision. Rather than calling Claire, he would find her. The business card listed her practice address, a small office in Evanston, not far from Northwestern's campus. If she wouldn't come to him with answers, he would go to her. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp. The storm of the previous day washed away. Alexander dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, foregoing his usual business attire. He didn't want to intimidate Claire more than his presence alone might do. The Aston Martin would be too conspicuous in a quiet suburban neighborhood, so he took his rarely used Range Rover instead. The GPS guided him to a tree-lined street of older homes, many converted to small businesses. Claire's practice occupied the first floor of a Victorian, painted a soothing sage green, with a discreet brass plaque by the door, Dr. Claire Hayes, Child Psychology. Alexander parked across the street, observing the house. A silver Volvo sat in the driveway, practical, safe, utterly unremarkable, like its owner seemed to be. What connection could this seemingly ordinary woman have to his sister's disappearance? As he watched, the front door opened and Emma emerged, skipping down the steps in a yellow sundress, her dark hair bouncing in pigtails. Claire followed, locking the door behind them. They were heading out somewhere, perhaps to church or Sunday brunch. Alexander made a split-second decision. He started the engine and followed at a discreet distance as the Volvo pulled away from the curb. They drove for about 15 minutes before turning into the parking lot of a small park with a playground. Emma bounded out of the car and raced toward the swings, while Claire settled on a nearby bench, a book in hand. This was his chance. Alexander parked and approached slowly, giving Claire plenty of time to notice him. When she looked up from her book, her face registered first surprise, then resignation. She closed the book and set it aside, straightening her shoulders as if preparing for battle. "You didn't call," she said as he reached her. "I thought this conversation should happen in person." Alexander sat beside her, his gaze following Emma as she pumped her legs on the swing, soaring higher with each arc. "She has Lily's eyes." Claire nodded, watching her daughter with a mixture of love and apprehension. "She has her spirit too, fearless, brilliant, stubborn as the day is long." "Is Lily her mother?" Alexander asked directly. Claire hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Biologically, yes." The confirmation hit him with physical force, though he'd suspected it since the cemetery. "Where is my sister, Claire? Is she alive?" "Yes," Claire whispered, and Alexander felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly undid him. 15 years of not knowing, of imagining the worst, lifted in that single word. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Why hasn't she contacted us? And why are you raising her daughter?" Claire twisted her hands in her lap. "It's complicated, Alexander. Lily. She had reasons for disappearing. Good reasons. What possible reason could justify letting her family believe she was dead or kidnapped for 15 years? His voice rose with anger, and Claire glanced nervously toward the playground. "Please, keep your voice down. I don't want to upset." "Emma," she took a deep breath. "Your sister was afraid, Alexander. Afraid of your stepfather." Alexander frowned. James? He was controlling, sure, but it was more than that. Claire's voice dropped even lower. "Lily found something, documents in his home office that she wasn't supposed to see, about your mother's death." A cold sensation spread through Alexander's chest. "What are you talking about? My mother died of cancer." Claire looked at him with sympathy. "That's what everyone was told. But Lily found evidence suggesting it wasn't. The cancer that killed her, or at least not only the cancer. She believed James had been slowly poisoning Eleanor with something that mimicked her cancer symptoms, accelerating her decline." Alexander recoiled. "That's insane." James loved my mother. He was devastated when she died. Was he? Or was he freed to take complete control of the company she had inherited from her father, the company that had been in her family for generations? Alexander started to protest, then stopped. His memories of that time were colored by his own grief. But looking back, James had thrown himself into work immediately after Eleanor's funeral, restructuring the company and pushing through changes his mother had always resisted. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying I believe it, why would Lily run? Why not go to the police? She tried, Claire said quietly. She took copies of what she'd found to a detective. 2 days later, there was a break-in at our dorm room. Nothing was stolen, but Lily's laptop was destroyed and the documents were gone. That same day, the detective called to say there wasn't enough evidence to open an investigation. Emma's laughter floated across the playground as she moved from the swings to the slide, oblivious to the grim conversation taking place. Lily was terrified, Claire continued. She believed James had connections in the police department, that she wasn't safe. So she ran. She called me from a bus station, told me what happened, and made me promise not to tell anyone, including you. She was afraid James would use you to find her. Alexander's mind reeled. The story seemed incredible, like something from a thriller, novel rather than his own family history. And yet, there had always been something off about James, a coldness beneath the polished exterior that even his mother had sometimes remarked upon. "Where is she now?" he asked hoarsely. Claire hesitated. "I can't tell you that, not yet. Lily's built a new life, a safe life. She has a different name, different appearance." "She's my sister," Alexander said fiercely. "I have a right to know." "You do," Claire agreed, "but this isn't just about you or Lily anymore. It's about Emma too." She watched her daughter climbing the jungle gym. When Lily found out she was pregnant, she was devastated. She wasn't ready to be a mother, especially not while living in hiding. But she couldn't bring herself to terminate the pregnancy either. "So she gave her child to you," Alexander finished. Claire nodded. "I was the only one she trusted. We arranged everything privately. I adopted Emma legally, but Lily has always been part of her life, just from a distance, as Aunt Lily, who lives far away but loves her very much. And the visits to my mother's grave. That was Lily's request. She wanted Emma to know about Eleanor, to feel connected to that, a part of her heritage, even if she could never know your stepfather." Claire looked at him directly. "I never expected you to be there yesterday. In 7 years, you've always come on the exact anniversary. Yesterday was a day early." Alexander ran a hand through his hair. "My schedule changed." He looked toward Dee. Emma, seeing his sister in the child's animated movements, a niece he never knew he had. Does she know that Lily is her birth mother? "No. We agreed to tell her when she's older, when she can understand why the secrecy was necessary." Claire touched his arm cautiously. "Alexander, I know this is a shock, but please think carefully about what you do next. If James is what Lily believes him to be, any attempt to find her could put her in danger again." The mention of his stepfather sent Alexander's thoughts spinning in a new direction. If what Claire was saying was true, if James had indeed killed his mother and covered it up so effectively that even Alexander had never suspected, then he had been working alongside a murderer for the past 15 years, had been molded by him, influenced by him, desperate for his approval. "I need proof," he said finally, "not just Lily's word or yours. I need to see what she found." Claire bit her lip. "Lily kept copies, not in digital form. She didn't trust. That after what happened to her laptop, physical copies hidden somewhere even I don't know. Then I need to speak with her directly." "That's not possible right now. She's not even in the country." Alexander's frustration mounted. "Then what am I supposed to do with this information? Pretend I never met you or Emma? Go back to working with James as if nothing has changed. No, Claire said firmly. I'm telling you this because Emma recognized you yesterday. She's been asking questions I can't answer. And because Lily has always felt guilty about leaving you behind. She's talked about reaching out for years, but fear held her back. "Mommy, watch me!" Emma called from the top of the slide. Claire waved and smiled at her daughter. "I'm watching, sweetheart." She turned back to Alexander. "Give me some time. Let me contact Lily, explain what's happened. She should be the one to decide how to proceed." Alexander stood abruptly. The revelations were too much, the implications too horrifying. He needed time to process, to think. "I'll give you 3 days. Then I want to know everything. Where my sister is, what evidence she has against James, all of it." Claire looked up at him, concern etched on her face. "What will you do in the meantime?" "Act normally," he said grimly. "Go to work. Face James. Try not to let on that I know he might be a murderer. Be careful," Claire warned, "if he suspects anything. And I've been navigating James's mood since I was 10 years old. I know how to handle him." Alexander glanced at Emma, who was now hanging upside down from the monkey bars. "Take care of her and tell Lily. Tell her I've missed her every day for 15 years." As he walked back to his car, Alexander felt as though the ground beneath his feet had shifted permanently. Everything he thought he knew about his family, his work, his life's purpose, had been called into question in the span of 24 hours. If Claire was telling the truth, if James had murdered his mother and driven Lily into hiding, then the company Alexander had devoted his life to building was founded on a lie. His success had been bought with his mother's life and his sister's freedom. The thought made him physically ill, but one small, bright point of hope shone through the darkness. Lily was alive. Somewhere in the world, his sister was living, breathing, perhaps even happy in her new identity. And he had a niece, a brilliant, spirited child with her grandmother's eyes and her mother's fearlessness. Alexander started the Range Rover, watching in the rearview mirror as Emma waved to him from the playground. He lifted his hand in response, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever the truth turned out to be, he would protect her. He would find Lily. And if James Morgan truly was the monster Claire described, Alexander would use every resource at his disposal to bring him to justice. As he drove away, a plan began to form in his mind. 3 days was plenty of time to begin his own investigation, quietly, carefully, without alerting James. The company records from that period would still exist in the archives. Medical reports, insurance claims, perhaps even the original police report when Lily went missing. It was time to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. For the first time in 15 years, Alexander felt truly alive. The grief and uncertainty that had shadowed him since Lily's disappearance had been replaced by purpose. His sister needed him. His niece needed him. And somewhere within the walls of Morgan Investments lay the truth that could free them all. Monday morning arrived with brutal clarity. Alexander straightened his tie in the elevator mirror, rehearsing the mask of normalcy he would need to wear. The familiar ping announced his arrival at the executive floor of Morgan Investments, where Grace waited with his schedule and a coffee prepared exactly as he preferred. "The Jensen merger team is waiting in the conference room," she informed, him falling into step beside him. "And Mr. Morgan called. He'd like you to join him for dinner tonight at the house." Alexander nearly missed a step. Dinner with James. Tonight, of all nights, when his mind was churning with suspicions and half-formed theories. "Did he say why?" he asked, keeping his voice casual. "Something about discussing the Reynolds proposal before the board meeting. Tomorrow." Grace handed him a folder. "These need your signature before noon." Alexander nodded, accepting both the folder and the inevitable. "Tell him I'll be there, 7:30? He said 7. And he mentioned it would just be the two of you, as Ms. Richards will be at her committee meeting. Better or worse without Veronica? Alexander couldn't decide. His stepfather's young wife might have provided a buffer, but her absence would allow for more direct conversation, perhaps even an opportunity to subtly probe about the past. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and presentations, his business instincts operating on autopilot while his thoughts remained fixated on Claire's revelations. During a break, he slipped away to his private office and locked the door. From his desk drawer, he removed a small notebook and began jotting down everything he could remember about his mother's illness and death. Eleanor Morgan had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer when Alexander was 20. The disease had progressed with devastating speed, leaving her bedridden within months. James had spared no expense, bringing in specialists from around the world, but nothing had slowed the inevitable decline. She died just before Alexander's 21st birthday, leaving control of Morgan Investments to James until Alexander reached 30, a provision that had seemed reasonable at the time, given his youth and inexperience. Now, with Claire's accusations echoing in his mind, Alexander questioned everything. Had his mother's symptoms truly matched her diagnosis? Had the specialists been legitimate or carefully selected by James to confirm what he wanted them to say? Most disturbingly, had anyone performed an autopsy after her death? He couldn't remember. Those days after her passing remained a blur of grief and disbelief. James had handled all the arrangements, insisting that Alexander shouldn't bear that burden at such a young age. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Morgan, the Jensen team is ready for your decision," Grace called through the door. Alexander quickly closed the notebook and stowed it in his briefcase. "I'll be right there." The rest of the day demanded his full attention, but beneath every conversation and decision lurked the shadow of doubt. Had his entire adult life been built on a foundation of lies? And if James had indeed murdered Eleanor, what else might he be capable of? At precisely 7 o'clock, Alexander's car crunched up the circular driveway of the Morgan estate. The Georgian mansion sat on 3 manicured acres in one of Chicago's most exclusive suburbs, its windows glowing warmly against the twilight sky. This had been his home once, though it had never felt that way after his mother's death. Now it belonged to James and Veronica, redecorated to erase nearly all traces of Eleanor's presence. The housekeeper, Mrs. Edwards, greeted him at the door. "Good evening, Mr. Alexander. Your father is in the study." "Stepfather," Alexander corrected automatically, a distinction he'd maintained since childhood, despite James's efforts to claim the title of father. Mrs. Edwards nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She had been with the household since before Eleanor's death and had always shown a particular fondness for Alexander and Lily. "Of course, sir. May I take your coat?" Alexander shrugged out of his overcoat, suddenly remembering that Mrs. Edwards had been present during his mother's illness. She might have insights, observations that hadn't seemed significant then, but could be crucial now. "Mrs. Edwards," he said quietly as she hung his coat in the closet, "how long have you worked for the family now?" "To do 23 years this October, sir," she replied with a touch of pride. "You were here during my mother's illness." A shadow crossed her face. "Yes, sir. A terrible time for everyone, especially you and Miss Lily." Alexander glanced toward the study door, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "Did you ever notice anything unusual about her condition or about James's behavior during that time?" Mrs. Edwards stiffened slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "I'm not entirely sure either," Alexander admitted. "But if you recall anything at all that seems strange, I'd appreciate hearing about it." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. Perhaps another time, sir. Mr. Morgan is waiting. Alexander nodded, filing the exchange away for future follow-up. Mrs. Edwards' reaction suggested there might be something to learn there. James Morgan rose from behind his mahogany desk as Alexander entered the study. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to wielding power. His tailored suit fit impeccably, and his handshake was firm as he greeted his stepson. "Alexander, thank you for coming." He gestured to the leather armchairs positioned near the fireplace. "Scotch, please." Alexander accepted the crystal tumbler, using the moment to compose himself. Was he breaking bread with a murderer? The thought seemed melodramatic, impossible, and yet a cold unease had settled in his stomach. "The Jensen merger is proceeding well," James remarked, settling into his chair. "Though I understand there were some last-minute concessions on the executive retention packages." Alexander sipped his scotch, the familiar burn grounding him. "Necessary ones. Jensen's leadership team is exceptional, worth the extra stock options to keep them engaged post-merger." James made a non-committal sound, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "And the Reynolds proposal? The board seems enthusiastic." "It has potential," Alexander acknowledged. "Their Asian market penetration complements our European focus." "And Catherine Reynolds?" James raised an eyebrow. "Veronica reports that she asked about you specifically at the fundraiser last month." There it was, the real reason for this dinner. Not business at all, but James's ongoing campaign to see Alexander suitably married, preferably to someone whose family connections would benefit Morgan Investments. "I'm not interested in Catherine Reynolds," Alexander said flatly. "You haven't even met her properly," James countered. "She's intelligent, well-connected, attractive, and recently divorced from the heir to Baldwin Industries, our chief competitor," Alexander finished. "How convenient that would be for your strategic planning." James's expression hardened slightly. "Your cynicism is unbecoming. I merely want to see you settled with someone appropriate. Like you settled so quickly after Mom died." The words escaped before Alexander could stop them, sharper than he intended. A flash of something, anger, guilt, crossed James's face before his expression smoothed into careful neutrality. "That's unfair, Alexander. I mourned Eleanor deeply. Veronica came into my life years later." Exactly 3 years later, when an unattached CEO approaching 60 had suddenly become attractive to a social-climbing beauty 15 years his junior. Alexander had never bought the love match narrative that James and Veronica presented to society. "I apologize," Alexander said, not meaning it. "I've been reflective lately. The anniversary of Mom's death always affects me." James nodded, apparently accepting the explanation. "Understandable, though it's been 20 years, Alexander. At some point, one must move forward." Had James moved forward immediately, perhaps even before Eleanor's death? The questions burned in Alexander's mind, but he couldn't risk revealing his suspicions. Not yet, not until he had proof. "Speaking of moving forward," James continued, "I've been considering my role with the company. Perhaps it's time I step back entirely, leave the board as well as the executive team." Alexander studied his stepfather carefully. This was unexpected. James had maintained his position as chairman of the board even after relinquishing the CEO role to Alexander 5 years earlier. He still wielded considerable influence over company direction, often putting Alexander and the board at odds. "What brought this on?" Alexander asked cautiously. James shrugged, the gesture too casual to be genuine. "Age, reflection. Veronica has been urging me to travel more while we're both still young enough to enjoy it properly. It made a certain kind of sense, And yet the timing seemed suspicious, given the revelations of the past 24 hours. Was this merely coincidence, or had something alerted James to potential scrutiny? "The board would certainly miss your guidance," Alexander said neutrally. "But you wouldn't," James replied with unexpected frankness. "Let's not pretend, Alexander. We've maintained a cordial professional relationship, but we've never truly connected as father and son. Perhaps that's my failure." The apparent vulnerability took Alexander off guard. Was this genuine or another of James's manipulative tactics? "We're different men," Alexander said carefully, "with different approaches to business and life." "Indeed." James set down his empty glass. "Like your approach to your sister's disappearance. Even after the police closed the case, you continued with those private investigators. Wasted millions over the years, I imagine." Alexander tensed. "Why bring up Lily now? Not wasted if there was even a chance of finding her." "False hope can be destructive," James said, his tone philosophical. "Sometimes it's better to accept the most probable truth, however painful. Lily likely ran away, perhaps fell victim to foul play afterward. The not knowing is difficult, but continuing to chase ghosts prevents you from fully engaging with your future." The irony of James counseling him to abandon hope for Lily's survival when she was very much alive might have been amusing in different circumstances. Now it felt sinister. "I suppose I'm stubborn that way," Alexander replied. "I don't give up on people I love." Something flickered in James's eyes, calculation perhaps, or annoyance at the implicit criticism. "Well, to business. The Reynolds proposal needs a decision by Friday." The conversation shifted to safer ground, and Alexander navigated it on autopilot, his mind racing with implications and possibilities. By the time he left the Morgan estate 2 hours later, he had reached several conclusions. First, Mrs. Edwards knew something. Her reaction to his questions had been too guarded for innocence. Second, James's sudden interest in retirement seemed suspiciously timed. And third, he needed to move quickly. If Claire was right, if James had indeed murdered Eleanor and possibly tried to harm Lily, then Alexander needed proof before confronting him or alerting authorities. As he drove back to his penthouse, Alexander placed a call to his most trusted private investigator. "Marcus, I need you to run a deep background check on someone. It's urgent and completely confidential." He hesitated, aware of the magnitude of what he was undertaking. "The subject is James Morgan." A stunned silence then. "Your stepfather? The chairman of your company?" "Yes, I need everything. Financial records going back 25 years, phone records if possible, travel history, medical contacts. And I need you to look into my mother's death, specifically whether an autopsy was performed and what the results showed. This is unusual, Mr. Morgan." "I know. I can't explain fully right now, but it's important. And Marcus, absolutely no one can know about this, especially not James or anyone connected to him." "Understood. I'll begin immediately." Alexander ended the call as he pulled into his building's garage. His mind kept returning to Emma, the unexpected niece with Lily's eyes, who had upended his understanding of the past 15 years. Whatever happened next, he had a responsibility to protect her and to find Lily. Family had to come first now. Tuesday morning found Alexander in the company archives, ostensibly reviewing documents related to the Reynolds proposal, but actually searching for records from the period surrounding his mother's death. The archive room was in the basement of Morgan Investments' headquarters, a climate-controlled space filled with rows of filing cabinets and shelves of bankers' boxes. Few employees ever ventured here. Most corporate records had been digitized years ago, but Alexander knew from experience that not everything made it into the digital archives. Some documents, particularly those related to family matters or Sensitive negotiations remained only in hard copy, filed away in folders that hadn't been opened in years. He moved methodically through the filing system, starting with the records from 20 years earlier. His mother's death had coincided with a major corporate restructuring, a connection he'd never thought to question until now. James had consolidated several divisions, replaced key executives, and shifted the company's focus from domestic manufacturing to international finance and technology investments. The official narrative had been that James was honoring Eleanor's vision, but looking back, Alexander could see how completely his stepfather had dismantled his mother's approach to the family business. Eleanor had valued the company's manufacturing heritage and the communities built around their factories. James had closed those factories within 2 years of taking control, outsourcing production overseas and repurposing the real estate for more lucrative developments. Deep in a file labeled Executive Succession Planning, Alexander found something unexpected. A memo from Eleanor to the board dated just 3 weeks before her final hospitalization. In it, she expressed her intention to accelerate Alexander's involvement in the company leadership, proposing a co-CEO arrangement with James that would give her son equal authority upon turning 25. James had never mentioned this plan. Instead, he had used the provision in Eleanor's will that granted him control until Alexander turned 30 to maintain complete authority for nearly a decade. Alexander photographed the memo with his phone, then continued searching. Another hour yielded more surprises, draft documents for a major corporate reorganization, very different from the one James had implemented, that would have preserved the company's manufacturing divisions while expanding into new markets. And most damning, a personal letter from Eleanor to the family attorney expressing concerns about James's financial decisions and requesting changes to her will. The letter was dated just 2 days before she entered the hospital for the last time. Had the attorney received it? Had James intercepted it? Alexander couldn't tell from the document alone, but it painted a disturbing picture of escalating tensions between his mother and stepfather in her final days. He was so absorbed in his discoveries that he nearly missed the sound of the archive room door opening. Quickly, he gathered the legitimate Reynolds documents he'd brought as cover and moved to a different section of the archives. Alexander? The voice belonged to Victor Harmon, James's longtime friend and the company's general counsel. Grace said, "I might find you down here." Alexander turned, forcing a casual smile. "Victor, just doing some background research for the Reynolds." "Deal." Victor glanced at the files in Alexander's hands. "Anything I can help with?" "No, I think I found what I needed." Alexander moved toward the door, eager to end the encounter before Victor noticed which section of the archives he'd actually been searching. "Was there something you wanted to discuss?" "James mentioned you seemed distracted at dinner last night. He's concerned about your workload." Translation: James had sent Victor to check on him, to see what he was doing in the archives. The realization sent a chill through Alexander. Did James suspect something? "I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. The merger has been demanding." "That's all." Alexander kept his tone light, even as his mind raced. How much had he revealed during dinner? Had his questions to Mrs. Edwards made their way back to James? Victor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me. We're all on the same team here." Were they? Alexander wasn't so sure anymore. Victor had been James's friend for 30 years, his legal advisor, through countless deals and personal matters. If James had indeed murdered Eleanor, could Victor have helped cover it up? "Of course," Alexander said smoothly. "I should get back upstairs. Board presentation to prepare for." As he rode the elevator to the executive floor, Alexander mentally reviewed the morning's discoveries. He now had evidence that Eleanor had been planning changes that would have significantly limited James's authority, potential motive for murder. But he still needed proof of the act itself, something that would connect James directly to his mother's suspicious death. His phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. Need to speak urgently. Same park, 1 p.m. CH. Claire. Something must have happened. Alexander glanced at his watch. Nearly 11. He could rearrange his lunch meeting to make the rendezvous. The morning crawled by, each minute stretching as Alexander navigated meetings and calls with half his attention, the other half fixated on what Claire might have to tell him. Had she reached Lily? Was Emma safe? At 12:45 he slipped out of the building, telling Grace he needed some air before his next meeting. The park was a 15-minute walk, but Alexander made it in 10, anxiety quickening his steps. Claire was already there, seated on the same bench as Sunday, but today her posture was rigid with tension. Emma was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Emma?" Alexander asked immediately, scanning the playground. "With a neighbor. I didn't want her to hear this conversation." Claire's voice was strained. "Someone broke into my office last night. Nothing was taken, but my files were searched, my computer accessed." Alexander's blood ran cold. "James." Claire nodded. "That would be my guess. I called Lily's emergency number, but she hasn't responded yet. I'm worried, Alexander. This is exactly what happened before she disappeared." "You think he knows about Emma?" The thought made Alexander physically ill. If James had harmed Eleanor, if he had driven Lily into hiding, what might he do to her daughter? "I don't know, but someone clearly knows about our connection." Claire twisted her hands in her lap. "I've been careful for 7 years. No contact with anyone from Lily's past, no social media presence, nothing that could link us. Then I meet you once, and suddenly my office is broken into." The accusation in her tone was clear. Had Alexander inadvertently led James's people to Claire? "I didn't tell anyone about you," he said firmly, "but I did begin investigating my mother's death and James's activities from that period. I accessed archived files today that probably haven't been touched in years." "He's watching you," Claire concluded, "which means he's watching me now too." Alexander thought of Victor finding him in the archives. Had there been surveillance cameras he'd missed? Or was James having him followed? "We need to move Emma somewhere safe," Alexander decided. "Somewhere James wouldn't think to look." "I have a colleague with a lake house in Michigan," Claire said. "I could say I needed emergency personal time. Ask her to take Emma for a few days." "Good. Do it today now. And then you should go somewhere else. Somewhere not connected to anyone James could trace." Alexander's mind raced through possibilities. "I have a friend with a guest house in Oak Park. He travels frequently and keeps it ready for visitors. I can arrange for you to stay there." Claire studied his face. "You believe me now, don't you, about what James did to your mother? What he might have done to Lily if she hadn't run? I found evidence this morning that my mother was planning major changes to the company's structure and leadership just before her final decline. Changes that would have significantly diminished James's power." Alexander's voice hardened. "And a letter requesting alterations to her will that never happened because she died before meeting with her attorney." Claire closed her eyes briefly. "Lily said there were financial documents, projections showing how James would benefit from your mother's death, and medical records that didn't make sense, symptoms that appeared after doctor visits, then disappeared before specialists could observe them. I need those records. My investigator is looking into whether an autopsy was performed, but if James was involved, he would have prevented it or ensured the results showed nothing suspicious." Claire finished. A middle-aged man with a newspaper sat down on a bench across the path, occasionally glancing in their direction. Paranoia prickled at the back of Alexander's neck. "We should move," he said quietly. "Walk with me." Claire nodded, falling into step beside him as they followed the winding path deeper into the park. Alexander kept his voice low. I need to speak with Lily. Whatever she found, whatever drove her to disappear, I need to see it myself. I told you she's not in the country. Then call her, email her, whatever secure method you use. Tell her I'm investigating James, that I believe her. Tell her. Alexander's voice caught unexpectedly. Tell her I've missed my sister every day for 15 years, and I want to help keep her and Emma safe. Claire's expression softened. I'll try again. But Alexander, you need to be careful. If James suspects you're onto him, especially with his sudden talk of retirement. I know. I'm watching my step. Alexander glanced around, ensuring they weren't being followed. Get Emma to Michigan today. Text me when you're both safe, using the same number as before. I'll arrange the Oak Park house and get you the details. They parted ways at the edge of the park, Claire hurrying back to her office to make arrangements for Emma, while Alexander returned to Morgan Investments, his mind churning with plans and contingencies. The afternoon passed in a haze of meetings and presentations, none of which commanded his full attention. At 4:30, his private investigator called. Mr. Morgan, I have preliminary information on your inquiry. Alexander closed his office door. Go ahead. First, regarding the autopsy, there wasn't one. The death certificate cites metastatic cancer as cause of death, signed by Dr. Gregory Winters, who was your mother's primary physician during her illness. Where is Dr. Winters now? That's the interesting part, Marcus replied. He retired abruptly about 6 months after your mother's death, moved to Switzerland. He's been there ever since, living quite well on what appears to be more than a doctor's pension would provide. Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. James paid him off. It appears possible. There's more. The restructuring of Morgan Investments immediately following your mother's death resulted in a significant increase in your stepfather's personal wealth. The company's pivot to international markets coincided with several offshore accounts being established in his name. Can you trace the money? I'm working on it, but these types of accounts are designed to be difficult to penetrate. I do have preliminary information on one more thing, your sister's disappearance. The detective assigned to her case, Thomas Reynolds, retired from the force 3 months after the investigation was closed. He purchased a vacation home in Florida shortly thereafter, despite having substantial debt recorded just months earlier. Another payoff. The pattern was becoming clear, and with each revelation, Alexander's doubt diminished. James had orchestrated all of it. Eleanor's death, the cover-up, the pressure on Lily when she discovered the truth. I need you to find Gregory Winters, Alexander said decisively. Whatever it takes, I need to know exactly what happened to my mother. That won't be easy. Switzerland has strict privacy laws, and if he's been paid for his silence, money can buy silence, but it can also buy the truth. Find him, Marcus, and find out everything you can about Thomas Reynolds, too. After ending the call, Alexander sat at his desk, staring out at the Chicago skyline as dusk descended. The pieces were coming together, painting a picture more horrifying than he'd initially been willing to believe. James Morgan, the man who had shaped Alexander's career and worldview for the past 20 years, appeared to be not just a controlling stepfather, but a calculating murderer. The thought of continuing to work alongside him to pretend nothing had changed made Alexander physically ill. But confronting James without definitive proof would be disastrous. If James even suspected Alexander was investigating him, Emma and Claire might be in danger, and Alexander himself could be at risk. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. With friend now, heading to other location soon. No word yet. At least Emma was safe for the moment. Alexander typed a quick response with the address and access information for the Oak Park guest house, then deleted the exchange from his phone. The fewer digital footprints linking him to Claire, the better. As he prepared to leave for the day, Grace appeared at his door. "Mr. Morgan, your stepfather called. He'd like you to join him and Ms. Richards for drinks at the Peninsula at 7, Grau. He says it's important, something about the board meeting tomorrow." Alexander hesitated. The last thing he wanted was another social encounter with James, but refusing might arouse suspicion. "Tell him I'll be there." The Peninsula Hotel's elegant bar was crowded with after-work patrons when Alexander arrived. James and Veronica had secured a corner table where they sat with another couple Alexander recognized immediately, Harold Reynolds and his daughter Catherine. A setup. James had arranged this important meeting as an opportunity to introduce Alexander to Catherine Reynolds, despite his clear disinterest the previous evening. The manipulation was so transparent, so typical of James's controlling nature, that Alexander almost laughed. Instead, he plastered on his most charming smile and approached the table. "James, Veronica, good evening. Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Reynolds, a pleasure to see you again." Catherine Reynolds was objectively beautiful, tall, blonde, with the polished appearance that came from wealth and careful grooming. She offered Alexander a practiced smile as he took the empty seat beside her. "Alexander, we were just discussing the charity gala," Veronica said. "Catherine is on the committee with me." "How wonderful," Alexander replied automatically, signaling a waiter for a scotch. He would need it to endure this charade. As the conversation flowed around him, charity work, mutual acquaintances, the upcoming social season, Alexander observed James. His stepfather seemed relaxed, confident, every inch the successful businessman. Enjoying an evening with friends and family. Was this the face of a murderer? Could he truly have orchestrated Eleanor's death, covered up the crime, and driven Lily into hiding, all while maintaining this perfect facade? "Alexander is being modest," James was saying. "The Jensen merger was entirely his vision. The board has been tremendously impressed with his leadership." Harold Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Not surprising. Morgan blood runs strong." "Morgan by adoption only," Alexander corrected, unable to help himself. "My mother was the Morgan. James married into the family, as I'm sure you recall." A brief, uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Veronica's too bright laugh. "Family histories can be so complicated, can't they? More champagne, Catherine." As the evening progressed, Alexander maintained the expected social niceties while his mind worked through implications and possibilities. Catherine, he noted, was more intelligent than her father's obvious matchmaking might suggest. She asked informed questions about Morgan Investments' sustainability initiatives and seemed genuinely interested in Alexander's responses. Under different circumstances, he might have found her engaging, but with the specter of James's crimes hanging over him, with Lily in hiding and Emma at risk, romantic entanglements were the furthest thing from his mind. When his phone vibrated in his pocket, Alexander excused himself to check it, stepping away from the table for privacy. The message was from Claire. "At location. Elle made contact, wants to meet you. Details tomorrow." Lily wanted to meet him. After 15 years, he would finally see his sister again. The thought sent a surge of emotion through him so powerful. He had to steady himself against the wall. When he returned to the table, James was watching him closely. "Everything all right, Alexander? You look as though you've seen a ghost." The choice of words sent a chill through him. Did James suspect? Was he toying with him? "Just a message from the Tokyo office," Alexander lied smoothly. "Nothing that... can't wait until morning." James nodded, but his gaze remained assessing. For the first time, Alexander recognized something predatory in his stepfather's careful observation, something calculating beneath the polished exterior. How had he never seen it before? The evening eventually wound down, with promises to meet again soon and thinly veiled suggestions about Alexander calling Catherine. As they waited for the valet to bring their respective cars, James drew Alexander aside. "You seem distracted tonight," he said quietly. "Is there something we should discuss?" Alexander met his stepfather's gaze directly. "Nothing specific, just thinking about the future." "The future," James repeated. "Interesting that you've been spending time recently studying the past. Victor mentioned finding you in the archives this morning." So Victor had reported back to James. As expected, Alexander maintained a neutral expression. "Background research for the Reynolds proposal? Their family history with Morgan Investments goes back 3 generations." James studied him for a long moment. "Family history is complicated, isn't it? So many secrets, so many versions of the truth. I've always believed in looking forward rather than back, a philosophy that has served Morgan Investments well." "Sometimes," Alexander replied. "Carefully, understanding the past is necessary to move forward effectively." Something flickered in James's eyes, a momentary hardness quickly concealed. "Perhaps, but one should be careful about digging too deeply. Not everyone appreciates having old wounds reopened." The warning was unmistakable. James suspected something, perhaps not the full extent of Alexander's investigations, but enough to put him on alert. "I'll keep that in mind," Alexander said, just as the valet pulled up with his car. "Good night, James." As he drove away, Alexander glanced in his rearview mirror. James stood watching his departure, a solitary figure against the bright lights of the hotel entrance. For the first time in his life, Alexander recognized his stepfather for what he truly was. Not just controlling or manipulative, but dangerous. Tomorrow, if all went according to plan, he would see Lily again. Together, perhaps they could finally bring James to justice for what he had done to their mother. But tonight, Alexander felt the full weight of his isolation. He could trust no one at the company, no one in his social circle. Everyone in his life was connected to James in some way, potentially reporting back to him. Except for Claire and Emma, strangers days ago, now his only allies, in a truth that seemed too terrible to believe, yet too substantial to deny. And Lily, the sister he had mourned for 15 years, alive but hidden, carrying evidence of crimes that had destroyed their family. As Alexander entered his penthouse, the silence enveloped him. Tomorrow would bring answers, he hoped, and with them, the beginning of justice for Eleanor Morgan. Wednesday dawned grey and misty, the lake obscured by a blanket of fog that swallowed the horizon. Alexander stood at his penthouse window, watching the shapeless clouds drift between skyscrapers, feeling strangely disconnected from the city he'd called home his entire life. In a few hours he would see Lily again, his sister returned from the dead. The thought still seemed impossible, despite Claire's assurances. His phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. 7 p.m., Montrose Harbour. Come alone. Park by the North Fishing Pier. No signature, but it had to be from Lily. The location was significant. They had spent countless summer evenings at Montrose Harbour with their mother, watching sailboats and feeding gulls. It was their special place, one James had never visited. With them, a place Lily would remember and Alexander would recognize immediately. The day stretched before him, 12 long hours until the meeting. How could he concentrate on quarterly projections and market analyses when his entire world had been upended? Yet he had to maintain appearances, especially now that he knew James was watching. As he dressed for work, Alexander's phone rang. Marcus, his investigator. "I found Gregory Winters," Marcus said without preamble. "He's living in Geneva, and he's willing to talk for a price." Alexander's pulse quickened. How much? 2 million. Cash, offshore transfer. An exorbitant sum. But if Winters could confirm James had poisoned Eleanor, it would be worth every penny. "Set it up," I want a secure call, recorded with his knowledge and consent. He's insisting on meeting in person, says he won't put anything in writing or on record, even with encryption. He's scared, Mr. Morgan. Alexander considered this. When and where? He suggested Zurich, neutral ground, 3 days from now. Time to be away from Chicago, away from James's watchful eye. It might be exactly what he needed. Book it. First-class ticket, under a different name. I'll handle the money transfer once I hear what he has to say. After ending the call, Alexander finished dressing with renewed purpose. The pieces were falling into place. Between Lily's evidence and Winters's testimony, they might finally have enough to bring James to justice. Morgan Investments headquarters hummed with the familiar energy of a workday in progress as Alexander stepped off the elevator. Grace met him with a coffee and his schedule, both of which he accepted with a distracted smile. The board meeting has been moved up to 10 a.m., she informed him, falling into step beside him. Mr. Morgan's request. And Ms. Richards called to thank you for joining them last night. She said Ms. Reynolds was quite taken with you. Alexander barely suppressed a grimace. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Why the change? Mr. Morgan didn't say, only that it was urgent. The entire board has been notified. Unease trickled down Alexander's spine. An urgent board meeting moved up with no explanation. It seemed suspicious, particularly given James's recent talk of retirement and his warning about digging into the past. Thank you, Grace. Please hold all my calls until after the meeting. In his office, Alexander reviewed the board agenda that had been emailed that morning. Standard items: quarterly performance review, update on the Jensen merger, the Reynolds proposal, nothing that explained the urgency. He was still puzzling over it when his desk phone buzzed. Mr. Morgan, your stepfather would like to see you before the board meeting. He's in the conference room already. Alexander checked his watch, 9:15. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. The delay was deliberate, a small assertion of independence. If James wanted to play games, Alexander could play too. He spent the next few minutes reviewing his notes for the board presentation, then made his way to the executive conference room. James sat alone at the head of the long mahogany table, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents. He looked up as Alexander entered, removing his glasses with deliberate slowness. Alexander, thank you for joining me. You requested an urgent meeting, Alexander replied, taking a seat 2 chairs away, close enough for conversation, far enough to establish separation. What's happened? James regarded him thoughtfully. I wanted to discuss something before the board arrives. You recall our conversation about my potential retirement? Of course. I've decided to accelerate the timeline. Today, I'll be announcing my immediate resignation from the board and all company positions. Alexander kept his expression neutral, though surprise and suspicion warred within him. That's sudden. May I ask why? Veronica and I have been discussing our priorities. Life is unpredictable, Alexander. One should seize opportunities for happiness when they arise. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've arranged for my shares to be transferred to a trust. You'll maintain voting control, of course. It was exactly what Alexander had wanted for years. Complete freedom from James's influence over the company. Yet the timing couldn't be more suspicious. Was this a genuine retirement, or was James attempting to distance himself from Morgan? Investments before Alexander uncovered evidence of his crimes? The board will have questions, Alexander said carefully, which I'll answer fully, but I wanted you to know first, as my successor and Eleanor's son. James leaned forward slightly. I've always had your best interests at heart, Alexander. Despite our differences, I hope you know that. The audacity of the statement, coming from the man who had likely murdered Alexander's mother and driven his sister into hiding, nearly took his breath away. He managed a non-committal nod, not trusting himself to speak. James checked his watch. The board members will be arriving soon. Shall we prepare to greet them? The board meeting proceeded with shocking smoothness. James announced his retirement with practiced humility, citing a desire to travel with his wife and pursue philanthropic interests. The board members expressed the expected combination of surprise and well wishes, followed by unanimous approval of Alexander's assumption of the chairman position in addition to his CEO role. Throughout the meeting, Alexander observed his stepfather with new awareness. James played his part flawlessly. The dedicated business leader ready to pass the torch, the proud father figure celebrating his stepson's achievements. Not once did his mask slip to reveal the calculating murderer Alexander now believed him to be. As the meeting concluded, board members stopped to congratulate Alexander and say farewell to James. Harold Reynolds was particularly effusive, mentioning again how much Catherine had enjoyed meeting Alexander and suggesting a dinner soon. When the room had emptied except for the two of them, James turned to Alexander with an expression of finality. "Well, it's done. Morgan Investments is fully yours now, as Eleanor would have wanted. She would have wanted to see it herself," Alexander replied, unable to completely suppress the accusation in his tone. "She was only 50 when she died." Something flickered in James's eyes, caution perhaps, or calculation. Cancer is a cruel disease. It takes the best people far too soon. "Yes," Alexander agreed, holding his stepfather's gaze. "Though I've often wondered if her decline was truly inevitable. Her doctors initially suggested she might have years, not months." James's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Medical prognoses are educated guesses at best. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some personal effects to collect from my office." As James left the conference room, Alexander remained seated, processing what had just occurred. His stepfather had effectively removed himself from Morgan Investments, severing the most visible connection between them while maintaining access to the wealth and influence the company had provided him for decades. It was a strategic retreat, Alexander was certain. But what had triggered it? Had his questions about Eleanor's death raised James's suspicions? Or was there something else, some other threat that had prompted this sudden withdrawal? Alexander's speculation was interrupted by a text message from Claire. "All arrangements confirmed for tonight. Be careful." The reminder of his upcoming meeting with Lily sent a surge of anticipation through him. Perhaps she had the answers he needed, the proof that could finally bring James to justice. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of congratulatory calls and meetings. Alexander maintained the expected enthusiasm about his new role, while his mind remained fixed on the evening ahead. At precisely 6:30, he left the office, telling Grace he had a dinner meeting and wouldn't be available until morning. Montrose Harbour was quiet on a Wednesday evening, especially in the misty spring weather that had lingered all day. Alexander parked his car as instructed and walked toward the North Fishing Pier, collar turned up against the light drizzle. Harbour lights cast ghostly reflections on the water, distorted by the gentle waves lapping against the moorings. A solitary figure stood at the end of the pier, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Even from a distance, even after 15 years, Alexander recognized his sister's posture, the slight tilt of her head, the way she stood with her weight on one foot. His throat tightened as he approached. "Lily?" he called softly when he was still several yards away. She turned, and for a moment neither of them moved. The woman before him was both familiar and a stranger, Lily's features transformed by time and deliberate changes. Her once blonde hair was now a rich auburn, cut in a sleek bob that brushed her shoulders. She was thinner than he remembered, her face more angular, But her eyes, those distinctive amber eyes that Emma had inherited, were unmistakably his sister's. "Alex," she said, and her voice broke on his name. They moved simultaneously, closing the distance in urgent strides. Alexander wrapped his arms around his sister, holding her tightly, as 15 years of grief and uncertainty crumbled into overwhelming relief. "I thought you were dead," he whispered into her hair. "All these years, I thought." "I'm so sorry," Lily murmured, her voice thick with tears. "I wanted to contact you, but it wasn't safe. I couldn't risk James finding me." And when they finally separated, Alexander studied her face, memorizing the changes time had wrought. "You look good for a ghost," he said, attempting a smile through his emotion. Lily gave a watery laugh. "You look distinguished. CEO suits you. A chairman too, as of today." Alexander guided her to a nearby bench. "James announced his retirement this morning." Lily's expression sharpened. "That's suspicious timing. Claire said you've been asking questions about Mom's death." "I found evidence suggesting Mom was planning to limit James's control of the company just before she got sick. And I located Dr. Winters. He's agreed to talk." "Winters?" Lily's face hardened. "He was complicit, Alex. I found records in James's home office, payments, notes about dosages and symptoms. James was poisoning Mom, making it look like her. Cancer was progressing faster than it was." Alexander had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of cold fury through him. "We need proof that will stand up in court. Winters's testimony could be crucial." "I have copies of what I found." Lily handed him a small USB drive. Financial records, medical notes in James's handwriting, emails between them discussing Mom's treatment plan. "I managed to photograph everything before I had to run." "Why did you disappear, Lily? Why not come to me?" She looked away, watching the harbor lights shimmer on the water. "I tried to go to the police first. The detective seemed concerned, took copies of everything. 2 days later, my dorm room was broken into, my laptop destroyed. The detective called to say there wasn't enough evidence to pursue an investigation." "He was paid off," Alexander said. "My investigator found that too. A detective named Reynolds who suddenly came into money after closing your case." Lily nodded grimly. "After the break-in, I received a phone call. No name, just a man's voice telling me that accidents happen to people who ask too many questions. He described what I was wearing that day, where I'd been. They were watching me, Alex. Why not come to me then? We could have faced him together. You were working directly under him by then, completely under his influence. I didn't know who to trust." Lily's eyes reflected old pain. "And I was terrified. If James could murder Mom and cover it up, what else was he capable of? I couldn't risk it. So I ran, changed my name, my appearance, started over completely." "And Emma?" Alexander asked gently. A complex emotion crossed Lily's face. Love, regret, determination. I never planned to become pregnant. When I realized I was going to have a baby, I nearly came back, but the fear was too strong. Claire has been raising her. Claire was my only friend who knew I was alive. She agreed to adopt Emma legally, to give her the stable home I couldn't provide while looking over my shoulder. But I've been part of her life from a distance. Aunt Lily, who visits when she can. She smiled sadly. Claire sends me videos, photos. I've watched Emma grow, even if I couldn't be with her properly. She's extraordinary, Lily. She has your intelligence, your spirit. We need to end this, Alex. I'm tired of living in fear, tired of being separated from my daughter. Determination hardened Lily's features. With what I have and Winters' testimony, we can finally bring James to justice. I'm meeting Winters in Zurich in 3 days. Come with me. Alexander's voice was firm. Between your evidence and his testimony, We can build a case strong enough that even James's connections can't bury it." Lily hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll come to Zurich. But Alex, you need to be careful until then. If James suspects what we're doing..." "I know. I'll maintain appearances, act as though I'm focused entirely on my new role as chairman." Alexander glanced at his watch. "We shouldn't stay here too long. Even with James retired, I can't be sure he doesn't have people watching me." They parted with another embrace, both reluctant to end the reunion, but aware of the risks. As Alexander drove home, the USB drive secure in his pocket, his emotions oscillated between elation at finding Lily alive and cold fury at all James had stolen from them. The penthouse felt especially empty that night as Alexander reviewed the files Lily had provided. The evidence was damning. Meticulous notes in James's handwriting detailing substances and dosages, timing the administration to coincide with Eleanor's medications, financial records showing payments to Winters through a shell company, emails discussing Eleanor's accelerated treatment plan in euphemisms that clearly referred to hastening her death. Alexander was still reviewing the documents when his phone rang near midnight. The caller ID showed Grace Mobile, unusual for his assistant to call so late. "Grace, is everything all right?" "Mr. Morgan, I'm sorry to disturb you." Her voice sounded strained. "There's been a situation at the office. A small fire in the archive room. Security found something concerning in the surveillance footage. I think you should come down here." Alarm rippled through Alexander. "What did they find?" "I'd rather not say over the phone, but it's important." Alexander hesitated. The request seemed suspicious, especially coming so soon after his meeting with Lily. "Have you called the police?" "Security is handling it. They specifically asked for your input before involving authorities." Grace's voice lowered. "It appears the fire may not have been accidental. The archives, where Alexander had been, searching for records about Eleanor's death. Was this James's way of destroying evidence or setting a trap?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he decided. If this was legitimate, he needed to know what had happened. If it was a trap, better to walk into it aware than be caught off guard later. He secured Lily's USB drive in his home safe, then texted Marcus, "Potential situation at Morgan Investments. If you don't hear from me by 2 a.m., implement contingency protocol." The Morgan Investments building was mostly dark when Alexander arrived, with only security lighting illuminating the facade. A single security guard greeted him in the lobby, checking his ID before directing him to the basement where the archives were located. The elevator doors opened to dim emergency lighting. The corridor leading to the archives smelled faintly of smoke. Alexander moved cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. "Grace!" he called, approaching the archive room. The door to the archives stood slightly ajar. Alexander pushed it open slowly to find the room empty. No Grace, no security personnel, just rows of filing cabinets faintly visible in the emergency lighting. One section showed signs of fire damage with soot-blackened cabinets. It was the same section where Alexander had found Eleanor's memo about company restructuring and her letter to the attorney. Not a coincidence, he was certain. "Grace!" he called again, stepping further into the room. The door swung shut behind him with a decisive click. Alexander whirled to find James Morgan standing there, a small revolver held casually at his side. "She's not coming," James said calmly. "In fact, Grace never called you at all. Modern technology makes voice simulation remarkably convincing, doesn't it?" Alexander's mind raced, assessing options. The basement had poor cell reception. The security guard upstairs was likely on James's payroll. No one else knew he was here except Marcus, and his investigator wouldn't raise an alarm until 2 a.m., nearly 2 hours away. "What do you want, James?" he asked, playing for time. "I want what I've always wanted, to protect what I've built," James gestured with the gun toward a chair. "Sit down, Alexander. We need to have a frank conversation about your recent activities." Alexander remained standing. "You mean my investigation into my mother's death, or my meeting with Lily tonight?" A flicker of surprise crossed James's face at the mention of Lily's name. "So she finally contacted you. I wondered if she might, after all these years. Did she feed you the same conspiracy theories she tried to peddle before she ran away?" "They're not theories when there's evidence." Alexander held James's gaze steadily. "I know what you did to my mother. I know you poisoned her to gain control of the company, then covered it up. I know you threatened Lily when she discovered the truth, forcing her to disappear." James sighed as if disappointed. "Your sister had a psychological break in college, Alexander. The pressure of school, grief over your mother, it affected her mind. She became paranoid, started making wild accusations. I tried to get her help, but she ran." "Save the performance," Alexander said coldly. "I've seen the evidence. Your notes on dosages, the payments to Winters, the emails. And I know about Detective Reynolds' sudden windfall after closing Lily's case." James's expression hardened. "Do you really think you can prove any of this, after 20 years, against a respected businessman with no criminal record? Even if you have documents, they can be explained away, discredited." "I'm willing to take that risk to get justice for her," Alexander replied. "And I'm not alone. Lily is alive, James. She kept copies of everything she found, and Winters has agreed to talk." For the first time, Alexander saw genuine alarm break through James's controlled facade. The gun in his hand wavered slightly. "You're bluffing," James said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Winters would never risk his comfortable retirement. "I'm meeting him in Zurich in 3 days. $2 million buys a lot of testimony, even from a co-conspirator." Alexander took a calculated risk, stepping closer to James despite the gun. "It's over. You can't silence everyone. You can't destroy all the evidence." James's jaw tightened. "Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not admitting it is, what's your end game here, Alexander? You'll drag the Morgan name through a scandalous murder trial, watch the company stock plummet, see your reputation tainted by association. And for justice," Alexander said firmly. "For my mother, for the 15 years my sister lived in fear. For my niece, who deserves to know her family without hiding." James's expression shifted at the mention of Emma. "Ah, so there's a child. Lily's, I presume. Another generation of Morgans." His smile turned cold. "How convenient that you've gathered all your vulnerabilities in one place." The implicit threat sent a chill through Alexander. "If anything happens to them, you'll..." "What?" James's confidence returned as he sensed a weakness to exploit. "You have nothing but circumstantial evidence and the word of a woman who abandoned her child. Meanwhile, I have a lifetime of connections, influence, resources." "And you're out of time," Alexander replied. "I implemented a contingency plan before coming here tonight. If I don't check in by 2 a.m., selected evidence goes to journalists at every major publication." He was bluffing slightly. Marcus had instructions to release information, but not everything Alexander had claimed. Still, the uncertainty in James's eyes suggested the bluff was working. "You wouldn't risk the company," James insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The company can survive scrutiny, can you?" Alexander took another step forward. "It's over, James." For a long moment they stood in tense silence. Then, with surprising swiftness, James raised the gun, aiming directly at Alexander's chest. "I built Morgan Investments into what it is today," he said, his voice cold with finality. "I won't watch you destroy it with these absurd accusations." Before James could pull the trigger, the archive room door burst open. Light flooded in, temporarily blinding both men. "Police! Drop the weapon!" James whirled toward the new threat, gun still in hand. The next moments unfolded in chaotic flashes, officers shouting commands, James raising his gun toward them, the deafening crack of gunfire. When Alexander looked up, James lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Police officers swarmed the room, securing the scene. Detective Michaels, head of Chicago PD's Financial Crimes Unit, helped Alexander to his feet. "You okay, Morgan?" Alexander nodded, still processing what had happened. "How did you know to come here?" "Your investigator, Marcus. He contacted me earlier today with some disturbing information about your stepfather. When he received your text about a situation at the office, he called me immediately instead of waiting until 2 a.m. Good thing, too." Michaels glanced at James. Looks like he was ready to add another murder to his record. 3 months later, Alexander stood on the deck of his lake house, watching Emma race along the shore with newfound exuberance. Nearby, Lily sat with Claire, both women laughing at the child's antics. The summer sun painted everything in warm, golden light. James Morgan had been indicted on multiple charges: attempted murder for his attack on Alexander, conspiracy and evidence tampering related to Lily's case, and first-degree murder in Eleanor Morgan's death. Dr. Winters' testimony, secured in exchange for immunity, had provided the final pieces needed to build an airtight case. For Lily, the transition back to public life had been challenging. After 15 years as Lillian Clark, reclaiming her identity as Lily Morgan meant confronting painful memories and adjusting to unexpected attention as the long-lost daughter who had uncovered her mother's murder. The most complex adjustment had been for Emma. Learning that Aunt Lily was actually her mother had initially confused and upset her. The 7-year-old had struggled to understand why the adults she trusted had kept such an important secret. Claire and Lily had worked together to help her process these revelations, with Alexander providing support and stability. "Uncle Alex," Emma called now, running up from the beach with a perfect skipping stone clutched in her hand. "Look what I found." Alexander examined the smooth rock with appropriate admiration. "That's a perfect 5 skipper at least. Want me to show you how?" Emma nodded eagerly, and they walked to the water's edge together. Alexander demonstrated the proper wrist technique, then watched as Emma attempted to mimic him. Her first throw sank immediately, but her second skipped twice across the surface, eliciting a delighted laugh. "Did you see that, Mom?" She called to Lily, the word Mom still new but increasingly natural on her lips. "I did. That was amazing," Lily called back, exchanging a smile with Claire. The arrangement they had settled on wasn't conventional. Claire remained Emma's legal guardian for now, with Lily steadily increasing her parental role as Emma adjusted. The 3 adults had agreed that stability and emotional security were paramount for the child, above any legal definitions of family. As the sun began to set, they gathered around the fire pit on the beach. Emma eventually dozed off against Lily's shoulder. "She's getting more comfortable with you," Claire observed softly as Lily stroked her daughter's hair. "Day by day," Lily agreed, her expression a mixture of joy and lingering sadness for the years lost. "She asked me yesterday if she could visit my lab in Amsterdam sometime." "We could all go," Alexander suggested. "Once the trial is over, a family trip to Europe might be exactly what we need." "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked, looking at Alexander. "Pursuing this? Your company's been through turmoil. Your family's private tragedy is now public knowledge." Alexander considered the question, gazing into the dancing flames. "No," he said finally. "There's pain in truth, but there's no peace in lies. Mom deserved justice. Lily deserved freedom from hiding. Emma deserves to know her real family." He smiled slightly. "And I'm finding that the truth, however painful, makes space for new beginnings." As if to punctuate his words, a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky above them. Emma stirred sleepily, having caught the tail end of the celestial display. "Make a wish," she murmured, her eyes already closing again. Alexander exchanged glances with his sister over the child's head. After 20 years of loss, 15 years of searching, and the revelation of terrible truths, they had found something precious. Not just justice, but family rediscovered and redefined. A chance to heal old wounds and build something new from the broken pieces of their past. Some wishes, it seemed, did come true, even if the path to their fulfillment was longer and harder than anyone could have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.